A piece of information has been going about for a few hours, but it hasn't gotten nearly the attention it merits. Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are actively contemplating terminating their future investment commitments in the United States as well as withdrawing from their current agreements with the country. Think about what that truly means for a moment. Not China, Iran, Russia, or Washington's own allies in the Gulf. The nations that have welcomed the nations that pledged hundreds of billions of dollars in investments during Trump's 2025 visit to Riyadh have been American military outposts for decades. The nations whose sovereign wealth funds are deeply ingrained in the American economy as a whole are now thinking about severing their economic ties. Today we will dissect this in the manner that it merits, using the precise mechanics, the genuine statistics, and the true repercussions in every aspect. Because something far deeper than a typical diplomatic dispute between partners with divergent preferences is concealed underneath this information. The economic parameters of an alliance are currently being fundamentally renegotiated, not at a negotiating table, but through the fear of capital withdrawal on a scale Washington has never had to consider in this approach before. You must first consider what these four nations truly stand for in order to fully comprehend the significance of what is happening. For the U.S. economy, since most coverage does not accurately reflect the size of their financial footprint, the Gulf region's 7 major sovereign wealth funds accounted for 43% of the global capital deployed by state investors in 2025, with a total outflow of $126 billion in only 1 year, $126 billion annually. And that number was recorded prior to the start of this crisis, prior to the firing of a single missile, prior to the attack of a single refinery, and prior to the destruction of a single data center. Suffered harm. These four nations, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar, are more than just U.S. military allies in a limited security context. Their sovereign finances are deeply ingrained in many facets of the American economy, making them significant, structurally integrated economic partners. Infrastructure projects, private equity firms, investment funds, and commercial real estate technology enterprises nationwide. Last year, Jared Kushner's fund received a notable investment from the Qatar Investment Authority. In Abu, it would take years for the Dhabi Investment Authority to completely unwind its holdings in various U.S. financial markets. These are the same nations who are currently contemplating the departure that no one in Washington seems to have foreseen when this operation was planned, according to numerous confirmed sources. You must know how much this operation has cost them in specific, quantifiable terms since it started in order to fully comprehend why they are thinking about it. Since the figures are not abstract, these four nations have become active Iranian target zones as of February 28th. Not because any of them took part in operations against Iran on an official basis, none did, not in public at least. However, because they are strategic anchors of Washington's regional architecture and host American military assets, they have borne the repercussions of a conflict that they did not start and were not consulted about before it began. It's astounding how much they've had to take in. Only the UAE has been forced to intercept 541 Iranian drones, 2 cruise missiles, and 165 ballistic missiles since the start of Iranian counter-operations. 283 drones and 97 ballistic missiles were intercepted by Kuwait. 10 drone systems and missiles were repelled by Qatar. In its own airspace, Bahrain fired down more missiles and drones. Additionally, only officially verified interceptions, that is, projectiles that were successfully neutralized before they reached their targets, are represented by these numbers. What passed is not included in them. 35 drones in the UAE successfully breached the nation's multi-layered defenses, resulting in substantial harm that the Emirati Defense Ministry had to publicly admit. Explosions in Abu Dhabi, fires in Dubai, and structural damage close to the Burj Al Arab were followed by the information that stunned analysts across the world when it was first revealed that an Amazon Web Services data center in Dubai had caught fire. That might be the first big cloud infrastructure facility to sustain damage in contemporary history, in a situation of active combat. The ramifications for cloud dependability, data sovereignty, and the region's overall technology investment thesis are still being considered. The Ras Tanura refinery in Saudi Arabia was attacked and shut down. This industrial complex is not an outlying one. One of the biggest petroleum processing facilities in the world is Ras Tanura, a vital link in international energy supply networks and the crown jewel of Saudi Aramco's production architecture. If it is taken out of service, even momentarily, it sends through commodities markets. Price signals are transmitted to all importing countries worldwide. The effects were felt immediately and internationally in Qatar. After the strikes, Qatar Energy was compelled to halt its production of liquefied natural gas. The biggest exporter of LNG in the world is Qatar. After Russian gas supplies were cut off, it became Europe's vital source of energy. The world's gas market saw a historic price spike as a result of their supply being halted. European natural gas prices increased by 66% in a single week. That figure is not a market statistic for households and businesses in Europe that are still dealing with energy pricing pressures from the prior supply disruption. The economic shock is direct. The aviation dimension has its own narrative beyond energy. In the days after the initial Iranian operations, over 70% of all flights into the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain were still canceled. With a passenger volume of almost 95 million, Dubai International is the biggest airport in the world, was essentially shut down over a period of about 8,500 weekly flights. In the immediate aftermath, stock markets in Saudi Arabia and Qatar crashed. In times of extreme uncertainty, exchanges in Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates completely halted trade rather than permit uncontrolled price discovery. That is the financial cost of a battle that these nations did not pick, did not prepare for, and were not informed of beforehand. And it is becoming bigger every day. Sign up for the report now and turn on all alerts, because the financial and geopolitical architecture we are analyzing here is precisely the level of insight this channel provides at every significant step. And this story will develop quickly in ways that the mainstream media will continuously underestimate. Let's go on to the main query this circumstance raises. For what reason are these governments genuinely thinking about taking their investments out of the U.S.? What specific strategic and economic logic guides a nation from Iranian strikes were absorbed on Monday, and by Friday, American investment withdrawal was threatened? The current crisis poses a simultaneous danger to these Gulf states' economic paradigm in three different and compounding ways. To comprehend why the withdrawal threat is not a bluff, why it is not simply emotional, and why Washington may have gravely misjudged the tolerance of its regional partners, it is necessary to comprehend all three. The immediate destruction of revenue is the first dimension. For the greater part of 2 decades, Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi have worked to establish themselves as leading hubs for innovation, investment, entertainment, and connectivity. These aren't petrostart backwaters protecting against fluctuations in oil prices. These advanced economies have been able to draw in foreign investment, talent, travel, and corporate headquarters by providing a certain level of stability, dependability, and predictability in their operations. Setting at the intersection of international commerce routes. A standstill at Dubai International Airport is more than just a problem for travelers. The core value proposition of the entire economic model is directly attacked. Every flight that is canceled, every corporate headquarters that is evacuated, and every investment decision that is postponed by a multinational corporation that is reevaluating its regional hub are examples of direct income losses that accumulate over time. The second level is reputational harm of a type that is very challenging to inverted. As a bridge to a sustainable post-petroleum economic future, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia have placed significant strategic investments on connectivity and dependability. The Vision 2030 framework, the significant investments in tourism infrastructure, the active pursuit of international athletic events, and the building of large data centers to draw in tech firms. These programs are all predicated on the idea that these nations are secure, stable, and predictable locations for business, construction, and investment. Even a brief period of active conflict zone status erodes the idea in ways that continue long after the present crisis has passed. For foreign investors making long-term capital allocation decisions, the reputational harm caused by a single week of missile strikes, airplane cancellations, and stock market suspensions may take years to fully heal. The breakdown of the regional diplomatic framework is the third and most profound aspect of these regimes had laboriously built over the decade before. Outside observers regularly underestimate this dimension, which is the one that causes the most genuine outrage in Gulf capitals. In order to maintain a feasible coexistence with Iran without necessitating either confrontation or surrender, the Gulf had spent years developing a carefully calibrated framework of regional tension management, a set of diplomatic understandings, economic interdependencies, and back-channel relationships. In 2023, Iran and Saudi Arabia reinstated full diplomatic relations following 7 years of total animosity. A significant diplomatic investment and cautious handling of both parties' domestic political sensitivities were necessary for this normalization. One of the world's largest natural gas deposits, the South Pars and North Dome gas field, is shared by Qatar and Iran. As a result, their working relationship has remained pragmatic. Oman had been a reliable and successful mediator between Washington and Tehran on a number of delicate matters for many years. Without consulting any of these governments before the trigger was pulled, all of that collected diplomatic capital and 10 years of painstaking buildup were destroyed in a matter of days. Now, as these nations contemplate the withdrawal option, think about the particular economic computation they are doing. These nations had shown the United States more than just kindness. They had made massive contractual commitments, tens of billions of dollars worth of military procurement contracts with American defense contractors, commitments to invest in U.S. energy, technology, and infrastructure initiatives. During Trump's visit to Riyadh in 2025, Saudi Arabia alone announced pledges of several $100 billion over 10 years. At the time, this amount was hailed as a hallmark of American economic diplomacy. These pledges were made with the tacit knowledge that the security partnership with Washington offered security, stability, and predictability. Now that comprehension has been fractured. The reasoning behind withdrawal is easy to understand. These states are being asked to bear the financial, political, reputational, and infrastructural consequences of a military campaign that they did not ask for, support, or learn about before it began. While diplomatic routes were still being aggressively pursued, their initial annoyance at Washington for starting operations quickly gave way to a more profound and long-lasting rage. Observing Iranian missiles and feeling enraged, drones attacked their own cities, refineries, data centers, and airports as a direct result of housing American military personnel in a conflict that Washington chose to initiate without consulting them. At the core of their stance, however, is a brutal paradox. And comprehending this paradox is crucial to comprehending why their circumstances are so structurally challenging. On the one hand, the Iranian strikes have brought them closer to Washington in the short term. American systems for air defense are vigorously defending Gulf airspace at the moment. In a formal joint declaration on March 1st, Jordan, the United States, and 5 Gulf Cooperation Council members denounced Iranian activity and reaffirmed their collective right to self-defense. Washington is not being broken up with. They're not going to change sides. However, on the other hand, they are bearing an increasing and growing financial burden for a conflict that they have no influence over, are unable to leave, and were never given the chance to voice their opinions before it commenced. Threatening to withdraw investments is not a form of diplomatic protest. It is a carefully calibrated economic signal given in the language of financial consequence, the only language that consistently leads to policy recalibration in Washington. This is the message that has been translated from diplomatic to direct. We will use the means under our control to make you feel the same harm if you don't manage the financial harm you are causing us. Now let's look at the petroleum numbers. Especially as the most immediate and globally significant leverage is found in the energy domain. The Strait of Hormuz has caused significant disruptions to maritime transportation. That tiny channel is used by about 30% of the world's seaborne crude oil commerce. Approximately 20% of the world's LNG supply passes via this choke point. Shipping companies and commodity trading institutions have made the decision to anchor a large number of commercial ships outside the strait, choose to completely avoid the passage rather than take on the transit risk premium. In just a few days, Brent crude prices have risen from about $70 to over $80 per barrel due to these interruptions, which have already impacted over 20% of the world's oil supplies passing through Hormuz. And if the present circumstances continue, it is just the start of the price trajectory. If Qatar doesn't start producing LNG again, if Saudi production capacity is still reduced after the Ras Tanura strike, if international shipping businesses continue to shun Hormuz, and commodity analysts' pricing forecasts enter a range that has significant political ramifications for all major oil-importing nations. In professional analytical circles, the figures under discussion are not small adjustments. In the event that the disruption turns out to be structural rather than transient, analysts are predicting $120, $130, or even $150 a barrel. This course poses an existential political issue for Trump in particular. The administration hasn't acknowledged this in public yet. As a key component of his economic policy, he ran on a clear and repeated pledge to lower American energy prices and provide relief at the gas pump. Less than 9 months remain until the midterm elections in November 2026. Voters won't need every extra dollar spent at the pump since it is a direct, visible, and politically identifiable expense. Economic analysts to elucidate. Furthermore, energy costs are not currently declining, they're ascending. The void. With every day that goes by throughout this operation, the gap between the campaign promise and the actual economic reality of American consumers grows. Iran's strategy for attacking Gulf infrastructure is carefully tailored to take advantage of this weakness. According to Thrawn, attacking Dubai would have a bigger political impact on the governments it wishes to pressure, and a bigger economic impact on the global system than attacking discrete military installations. Dubai has an unparalleled impact on the world stage. An strike on a remote desert site would never result in the kind of market responses and international press coverage that a fire in a data center in Dubai would. Thrawn believes that the economically catastrophic effects of its Gulf retaliations will create enough pressure on the Gulf monarchies to force their governments to put pressure on Washington for a ceasefire. A carefully planned pressure cascade is the mechanism being demonstrated in real time. Iran aims to harm Gulf economies. Gulf economies sustain significant harm. The governments in the Gulf use that harm to put political pressure on Washington. Washington must decide whether to continue the operation or forfeit the financial and logistical support of the regional partners. The Gulf's official admission into that cascade is the investment withdrawal threat. Their economic messaging to Washington conveys a clear message. We will impose similar repercussions on you if you fail to control the effects Iran is having on our economies. Owns. Now, as the three practical situations have extremely distinct outcomes and must be recognized clearly, let's investigate with true analytical accuracy what happens in each of them if this withdrawal truly occurs. A partial departure acting mainly as a political signal is the first and most likely scenario for the foreseeable future. Gulf governments reroute certain sovereign funds, suspend some forward investment pledges, and freeze pending but unfinished contract signatures, flows in the direction of non-American destinations, and inform Washington in a clear but confidential manner that the complete economic connection is now expressly contingent upon a proven de-escalation effort. This scenario has more symbolic than disastrous immediate financial effects. However, the political signal it sends is strong, clear, and challenging for an administration that prioritizes economic performance indicators to overlook. This is an official announcement from Washington's most. The partnership has entered conditional territory with financially significant regional partners. In the second scenario, sovereign fund cash is reallocated away from U.S. assets in a more substantial and long-term manner. This is the point at which the financial repercussions become quantifiable, impacting not only diplomatic ties but also American households and businesses. In 2025, Gulf sovereign funds spent $126 billion worldwide. If a significant percentage of those flows, let's say 20–30%, is consistently steered toward European, Asian, or emerging market locations rather than American Treasury bonds, American real estate, or American equities markets, the consequences are evident and have a lasting impact on the American financial system. Yields rise due to a decline in demand for Treasury bonds. At a time when debt service expenses already account for a historically significant portion of the federal budget, higher yields raise the cost of servicing the national debt of the United States, a spiral of higher borrowing costs via consumer credit, corporate lending, and mortgage sectors. The harm is genuine, but it is neither abrupt nor catastrophic. For an administration already managing internal economic difficulties, it is sustained and politically accountable in significant ways. Although the third scenario, a total breakup of military procurement contracts, is the least likely to happen anytime soon, it would have the most severe symbolic effects. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are two of the biggest buyers of American defense apparatus worldwide. Tens of billions of dollars in contracts for numerous ongoing programs are held in the Gulf by Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and other significant defense contractors. If those contracts were abruptly and completely canceled, it would be a true industrial earthquake that would result in immediate job losses in American defense manufacturing, undermine the unit economics of production programs that rely on foreign orders to remain cost competitive, and send a signal on the dependability of the alliance relationship with all other U.S. defense partners worldwide, ships that support their business connections. Before concluding, there is one more factor that cannot be disregarded, and that Washington's pre-operation planning most likely did not sufficiently model: Asia. The Middle East accounts for almost 38% of China's maritime imports of crude oil. Instead of protracted fighting, China has a structural economic interest in swift regional stabilization. Its own energy costs and supply chain vulnerability are directly increased by persistent Gulf disruption. However, China also has a strong strategic interest in taking advantage of this unique opportunity to formalize and strengthen its economic ties with Gulf allies who are actively seeking methods to lessen their reliance on the financial and security infrastructure centered on the United States. Beijing will be in a good position if Gulf sovereign wealth funds start routinely rerouting capital flows away from the United States. Absorb a sizable portion of those rerouted flows, strengthening financial ties with the Gulf at a time when U.S. influence in the area is being put to the test. When Washington decided to start operations without consulting its regional partners, it most likely did not consider the long-term geopolitical consequence of that capital reorientation, which would be a sustained deepening of Gulf-China financial integration at the expense of Gulf America financial integration. Sign up with Share and distribute this video to anyone who wishes to comprehend the complete financial and strategic architecture of this crisis, as the analysis we have just covered does not fit into a news headline and is often omitted by the main networks. At its most basic level, this circumstance demonstrates something that foreign policy scholars are well aware of, but political leaders throughout history have continuously undervalued it at the most crucial times. In the modern era, economic, military, and global power are not distinct areas that can be controlled separately. Large-scale military operations cannot be carried out in an economically significant region, like the Gulf, without producing economic repercussions that support the operation's political viability. You cannot expect your allies to bear the expenses of a battle they did not initiate without eventually compelling them to consider whether their continued allegiance to the alliance is in the best interests of their country. They would rather not have to perform these calculations. The biggest surprise of the operation so far, according to Trump himself, has likely been Iranian retaliation actions against Gulf nations. That statement may not have been meant to be as illuminating as it is. Washington's description of the economic devastation caused by Iranian retaliation strikes against the United States' closest regional partners is surprising. This indicates that it was not part of the operational arranging. This indicates that prior to the decision to take action, the economic feedback loops from Gulf vulnerability to American alliance costs were not sufficiently modeled. Furthermore, the allies who wind up footing the unexpected cost eventually cease waiting for Washington to recognize the issue and begin acting unilaterally to safeguard their own interests when the economic eventualities are not included in the plan. That type of unilateral action is what the Gulf investor pullout threat represents. It is the choice made by allies who were not consulted, who are facing unintended repercussions and find it difficult to leave, and who have discovered an economic lever strong enough to compel the dialogue that diplomatic avenues have not yet yielded. There is no military outcome being negotiated at the moment. It is the cost Washington's Gulf allies are prepared to bear for an initiative they did not support. Additionally, that cost is rising daily. That the present course is maintained without a viable de-escalation strategy that safeguards both American geopolitical goals and their economic interests. The description includes a list of all sources. Check each figure for yourself. If you want to continue working through this situation with the discipline and depth it requires, subscribe to From Report. We'll see you at the next breakdown very soon.